Hey everybody, Erin James here from Crafty Housewife Yarns, and I had gotten a lot of questions, so I wanted to do an actual video on two-plying, and I feel like I have done a few videos before on two-plying, but they were more just like kind of part of other videos, not so much a whole video all by itself about two-plying. So here you go. So I'm going to assume that if you are watching this, you are probably somewhat new to knitting. Or not knitting, spinning. You're probably somewhat new to spinning, but probably not a brand new yarn lover. But just in case, for a review, this is a lovely example of a two-ply yarn, as seen by one of our featured artists. So I just had to give credit where credit's due, but this is some beautiful hand spun by one of our featured artists and is going out in our hand spun yarn subscription. But this was a great example of a really pretty, like, chunky, bulky weight two-ply yarn. And let's see if it says what. This is a merino. So that is a great example of two-ply versus this is also a merino. But this is a single ply versus a double ply. And you can see that they are pretty close. Let me unwind it. In size. But when we say two-ply, we basically mean that this is a single ply. So a two-ply is if you, when you're spinning, you take two of these singles and twist them together, ply them together, and then you end up with a stronger two-ply yarn. So anyhow, that is my example of one versus the other, so you know what we're talking about for this video. Okay, one of my first things I want you to know about two-ply is that one of the, main reasons people like it, one is it makes the yarn stronger, but two, it can really affect the outcome of the structure of the yarn as well as the size. So I know I've always tended towards a thicker yarn spinner, especially when I started out. I spun really thicker yarn. Over the years, of course, I now can spin super duper thin without thinking anything about it. But when I started out spinning thicker. So I never understood people. From talking to a lot of spinners, it seems like most people are on the opposite end of they start out spinning really thin and then they want to make something really lovely and squishy like this sweater. And they're frustrated because they want some thicker yarn in order to make a thicker, chunkier project. And so one of the best ways for people that naturally spin thin to achieve the thicker, squishier yarn is by plying. And two-plying is definitely usually everybody's first step into the plying pool. I mean, there is chain ply, which kind of gives the illusion of three-ply or three-plying, but two-ply is what we're talking about today, so we're going to go with that. But I just wanted to show you a difference. This is a beautiful, chunky sweater that the staff made me because they're the best in the whole world. And it is all made out of hand spun by about 4 different spinners. And so I wanted to show you that all in one project that you see all looks very cohesive and nice together. We have a lot of examples of some beautiful chunky two-ply. So this is two-ply, this is two-ply, a lot of it is two-ply, this is two-ply, and you can see how the different colors are, actually that looks like one of our braid club braids. I'm like recognizing things now, but you can see how all the colors are mixed and play in there together. That's one of my main reasons I love two-ply, and it was one of the things I first fell in love with hand spinning, was I loved the just random mixing of colors. So instead of having larger groups of certain colors, I like the idea that it was like always a surprise. And I have friends that really plan out their spinning, and we have lots of blogs and stuff on that of theirs that I will share for if you want to get very into planning your spinning. I always just love two-plying because you get to see kind of how things turn out without, it's a surprise. I like it, so I like surprises. So this is a beautiful example here of some nice thick two-ply yarn, but then I wanted to hold it up, and let me find, here we go. So this is another section in the same sweater that is single-ply yarn. So this is a chunky single-ply right next to the chunky 2-ply, and you see that they work very well together in the same sweater and would be the same gauge and behave the same way. So what I wanted you to take away from that was sort of general yarn design of, one, if you already happen to spin thinner, 2-ply, and you want some nice squishy yarn, 2-ply can be a great way to do that. But it is not, I didn't want it to come off as that was the only way. Sorry, I have fuzz on my face, as always. It's not the only way to have thick yarn. You can also achieve the thick yarn with a single ply, but it's definitely going to, and it can even be in the same project. So size can be determined by the size of your single, or you can take two thinner singles and make a 2-ply, and they will both come out the same gauge. And that's kind of a talk for another day. I don't want to get too off topic on how you would achieve both of those, but there you go. A single and a 2-ply right next to each other in the same project, but it definitely affects the structure and size of the yarn. I also wanted to talk about how 2-plying can affect the structure, like the final outcome on your yarn. So I've got a handful of examples here for you. So you can go anything from really different and you'll end up with wild and crazy chenille yarn. Or if you spin very consistently, oh, this is so pretty. Look at all the color variation. You can end up with some very nice, very even 2-ply yarn like this one, also from Jennifer Batt, one of our featured artists. So she has her pretty logo, so I have to show that again because I don't want y'all thinking I'm responsible for this pretty yarn. But look how pretty this is, and you can see how her plies on this particular yarn are both very thin, and she's a very even spinner. So you can see how the two thin plies together, and try to get this in focus, the two thin plies together come out for a nice even yarn as seen here. So that is my example of an even plied yarn. And then this one is a funky crazy one I spun. This was an experiment. This was actually a kind of a chenille thread, the fuzzy part. And then I plied it with, so you can see the thread with a bulky woolen style single. So that's how this crazy yarn came to be. But you can see I wanted an example of using the real thin. One ply is thread and the other ply is yarn. And so by putting the one thin thing with the thick thing, you can end up with this really fun yarn, which I don't know what I'm going to do with this, but I'm excited about it. It's going to be like a cool something. So that is an example of a kind of a thick and thin, a very extreme thread ply, I guess I would say, to turn out that way. So that's an example of 2-ply. And then these two are actually two mill spun yarns, and they are from Gallery Yarns, which is one of our favorites and one of our few yarns that we carry wholesale that, you know, aren't just our own line. So we all know I love Galler. So go check these out on our site. They're a great boutique yarn brand and are near and dear to my heart. But the reason, these two yarns are actually two of the reasons that I found them in a yarn shop outside of Nashville. And I was like, that's the coolest mill spun yarn I've ever seen. And the reason I liked it is this is actually cotton. So this is a cotton mill spun yarn, but look at all the texture variation that you're getting. And this is the only yarn I've ever seen that's really this way that's cotton. So you can see, I'm trying to zoom in here, the two single plies to achieve this yarn would have to be slightly variated in size. So then when they are 2-plied together, they make this really cool stitch definition when 2-plied together that I think, like I said, especially for a cotton yarn, because cotton yarn can be kind of boring. This one is definitely not boring. You can achieve this really cool texture. Like I said, and this is even a mill spun yarn, but you get the idea. So you could also do this with your hand spinning, except I could not achieve this with me spinning cotton. I can spin cotton, but it wouldn't look this good. So I just let Galler get it spun for me. But that was a beautiful example of how the two singles were variated in size. So then when they were two-plied together, you end up with this really cool texture, which can also be seen. This is also a yarn from Galler, but this is our exclusive, so I have to talk about it, of the natural of the Galler Asana. And this one is an even more extreme example of, see how it changes from kind of thinner to bulkier. And the way this would be done, I mean, to me, this looks like hand spun, but it was mill spun, which is why I love it, because it plays so well with hand spun. It's actually, this yarn is what was the white ribbing in the sweater I just showed you. So you didn't even notice that it wasn't hand spun, and it was holding the whole sweater together. But same thing with this, the way this was achieved was the two singles would go from thin to thick to thin to thick to thin to thick. So then when they are plied together, you get this this is my absolute favorite texture. This is my yarn right here. I love it. And this is what I'm always going for. Because to me, if you want perfect yarn, you can go buy a whole bunch of perfect yarn places. But if you want yarn with cool, fabulous two-ply texture like this Galler Asana is the only mill spun I've ever seen that makes me nearly as happy as hand spun. But that's a great example of how the two single plies, by making them not perfectly even, result in a really cool final product. Whereas this yarn is hand spun, and it's actually more quote-unquote well-behaved looking than that mill spun I just showed you. And oh, this one's just beautiful. I'm supposed to send this out for one of our hand spun subscriptions, but I might have to keep it. Sorry, Jennifer, I just really like this one. Look at the colors in it. So I think this is a great time to talk about overall yarn design. So what I love about this one was Jennifer really let the colors, the natural colors of this wool, be the showpiece in this yarn, versus trying to make the texture be the showpiece in the yarn. So that's when you're looking at making a final product with yarn, and I talk about it a lot in our Dream Yarn course on Patreon, is looking at what you want to most accomplish from your final product. And so in this case, this beautiful yarn was accomplished by really letting the subtle fiber variations be what stood out in this yarn. And then she kept the singles both very even. So these, when she was spinning, she did a great job of keeping her singles both very even. So then when they were plied together, it just really let the natural colors of the wool, or if this was even a hand-dyed fiber or bat, would let the colors stand out, not so much the texture. Whereas this one is all one color. So the color, even though it is beautiful, is not so much what's standing out, it's the texture. So there is two good examples of texture versus color and color versus texture, which was both highlighted by, you know, how they were applied together. So it's like makeup, I guess. Okay. For this tip, I wanted to show you that how you kind of set up to start to two-ply can really affect your general enjoyment and the outcome of the yarn. So I have a whole nother video on, this is my Spinolution Echo. And so this is the Spinolution Lazy Kate that goes all the way across on the back. It also has little feet that, you know, can come out. So you could put this on the floor. So before you get going, I would think about how you best wanted to do this. And that's one thing I love about this setup, is that you can really tailor it to how you want. So attached on the back like you have it, you could bring it like I have here, where I have one bobbin here, one bobbin here, and then I'm bringing both of the plies around this third peg, which y'all have heard me talk about in many videos. That is usually my preferred setup. Because I feel like by bringing the two singles, you can see single number 1 and single number 2, and then they come over here around this third peg. To me, lets me then hold it in my hand out to the side before it goes into the wheel. And this keeps it, as you see, very far away from the drive band and the flyer head, which you wouldn't want it, because that's, and also these pegs. So basically what you're trying to do is keep your yarn from getting snagged by your flyer pegs or your drive band and snatching it away from you and tying it in a giant knot and causing lots of irritation. So you're trying to figure out which way to ply that is going to most help you not have those things happen. So for me, I really like, and it's easy to just bring it around this third peg, and then as I'm plying, I'm bringing this hand out this way and then feeding it up. So this way and feeding it up, and that keeps it, as you see, very far away. You also want to keep tension in mind, because obviously I'm not spinning right now because I'm holding the camera. But if you would want to keep, I like to keep kind of a tension on my yarn, because if you're letting it get all herky-jerky and you're like flipping and flopping it around, then this is a really easy way for that loose part to get snagged. So keep a nice tension on your yarn, on both coming off the wheel and coming onto the wheel, where there's a nice tension, and just be mindful of that, especially if you're a new spinner. So that would be setup number one. Here is a different setup that I also have a totally different video on, that on this particular flyer, I can't even talk. On this particular Lazy Kate, I feel like this is a good option too, but you may want, you'll probably like one versus the other. I spin on these all the time, so I'm pretty good either way. And on this one, since it's such a wide Lazy Kate, for me, I'm perfectly comfortable having one on one extreme end, one on the other end, and then leaving, there would be another peg here. I just have it in my basket. So imagine there being another peg here, leaving the two in the middle pegs open. So on the last one, I had this one here, and we're bringing them both around the side, around this third peg. So I had this one here, and we're bringing them both around the back. This way of plying, I have them on either end, so I actually, it looks more, I don't know, impressive this way, I guess. I have one thread coming in this way, one thread coming in this way. One thing I would be mindful of, here I'm going to ply, is I do feel like this way, especially if you're a newer spinner, you might not want to do it this way, because see, my two yarns are closer to my flyer pegs as they go around. So see, if I don't keep a good tension on my my yarn as it goes in, it could easily get snagged on this side or snagged on this side. So it's definitely still an enjoyable way to two-ply, but I would be mindful of keeping it out on the sides. A little troubleshooting for if you're two-plying this way is, like I said, you want to keep your tension. So I've got my hands way back here where I can keep an eye on where those are going. I also adjusted the tension on my tension block and made it a little bit stronger of an uptake than when I was just spinning the singles, with the idea that I wanted the wheel to take the yarn from me a little bit quicker, or with a little bit more pull than normally, than when I was just single plying, because that keeps the tension here a little tighter, which then helps me keep this up and out of the way. But you can see why, while this does look really impressive, and it would take pretty downward facing photos of, oh, look, the yarn's coming from both sides. For, all intensive purposes, when I'm not impressing anyone and I'm just plying in my house, the way I would do it would be put it here. Let's see if I can transition this. Bring it both around this third peg. Let me adjust this. You can move the camera out a little bit. So now you can see I've got one here, and one around that third peg. And I'm trying to spin and adjust the camera. But you can see now I'm bringing my hand out to the side. and then letting it feed in. And you just be mindful when you get here that that doesn't snag. I bring my hand out to the side and then let it slowly feed in. Of course, a third option for this one would be take off the lazy Kate, put its little feet out, and put it on the floor. My first wheel I learned to spin on was a Louette, and it had the lazy Kate, so I know a lot of wheels have a lazy Kate that's kind of built in on the floor. My King B, the Spinolution B style wheels, the lazy Kate goes down the side. So instead of being upright or on the floor, it's kind of on the side. Both of which, I mean, if you really wanted to keep those far away, would be over there. So the name of the game is just get your bobbins, your singles, and your lazy Kate positioned, if you can move it on your wheel to where you would want it to best be. But even if you can't move your position of your lazy Kate like you can with this style of wheel, you can or should be able to change your bobbin configuration to bring it around the side. So you can either bring it around the side or you can do one around each side that way. Okay, so for the actual spinning, if you're like, okay, Erin, I have figured out how to get my yarn to come off my lazy Kate and not get it tied up. I just want to two-ply some really pretty yarn, and I'm having trouble with it. The two biggest problems I see with people that are starting out with two-plying is they're usually either, and it's kind of the same, like the flip side of the same problem you would have with spinning singles, is either too much or not enough twist. Too much twist, let me stop all of these, would be if you, let's put this on a smaller gear to demonstrate. So I've moved this down a gear, which is going to give me more twist per push on this. So too much twist would be, here, let me do this. If you're twisting and twisting and twisting and you're holding on to it and holding on to it because you're like really nervous about it, so you're like spinning and twisting, it's not going anywhere. See how it'll get kind of pigtaily there? And, you know, not the end of the world, and the fix for that is to either, one, don't have as much twist, but if you've already spun it and it's really twisty, you can get a nitty knotty and wet set it. I like to, and I mean, my nitty knotties get kind of tore up, but you know, who cares, nitty knotty. I will wet the yarn while it's on a nitty knotty and let it dry stretched out, and that helps a whole bunch. But when you're actually spinning, I would maybe put it on a larger gear than maybe even what you plied with. And then you also want to just not hold on to it as long. And I like to feel the twist in this hand. And you can also kind of feel it. I like to put my fingers for this other hand kind of in between the two. So it's like you can kind of feel the yarn as the twist becomes like optimum twist for me. I can feel that it gets even on this one, and then I can feel it kind of, not pinching, I mean pinching's not the right word, but hugging, if you want to go with it, kind of wrapping around my fingers on this hand. So for me, I've really learned a good spinning by feel, and so I'm just kind of taking it and feeding it in. So I can feel when that twist is like even, but not too twisty. And by just gently feeding it in, that also solves the problem from sometimes if you're not paying attention, and especially if you have your yarn on one of these lower pegs, sometimes people, I have a whole nother video on this, the yarn will jump off and kind of twist around up here. And having even tension here, keeping that even tension where it's not like loose and floppy. Loose and floppy is basically your enemy. So just when you feel that and you've got just enough twist, just kind of feed it on there. And that way your bobbins up here aren't, you know, you don't want your bobbins all like spinning wildly out of control and crazy and careening down the hill. You just want everything moving at a nice, even speed. So that, I would say go up a gear and then feel the tension and just slowly feed it on to not have too twisty of yarn. Opposite problem I will see are people that when they look at their final yarn, here, let me see if I can kind of show you. When your final yarn, so imagine this is off the bobbin, and you're looking at it and you're like, well, it's twisted together, but you know, it's kind of like, you know, just super loose and kind of droopy and doesn't have very good structure. So it would kind of look like that. And if you're knitting, I mean, you can easily see how like a knitting needle could go through that. And, you know, it's just, it still looks kind of cool. And when you're first starting out, you'll probably spend a lot of yarn that looks like that. So, you know, don't beat yourself up. But it could be kind of aggravating to spin. So that would be not enough twist. So for not enough twist, I had, in order to demonstrate that, I'd moved this up. If you're getting too much twist, I would maybe move down a gear size so you're getting more rotation. And then in your case, you want to hold on to the yarn longer. So if you're getting not enough twist, then you're letting it kind of feed onto the bobbin without getting enough twist. And so they're just kind of like laying on each other, not so much like evenly plied together. So in order to correct that, I would go down a gear size and then hold on to the yarn up here long enough to look at. I mean, you can look at it and tell like, oh, okay, that's twisting tight and evenly on itself. It's not just kind of like loosely draped around itself. So hold on to your yarn a little bit longer, go down a gear size, and that should straighten you right out. One more really quick bonus tip, I guess, is unless you are lucky to have a life where nobody disturbs you when you're spinning yarn, which I definitely don't have, there will probably come a point where you're two-plying and you're like, oh, now I gotta go, you know, break up whatever fight my kids are having. And different wheels will be different ways. On Spinolution, I feel like it might be on the right or might be on the left. I have them on both. There's usually two little pegs that are, see how they're like close together. I'm not actually sure what the official reasoning for that is. I think it might be a weight thing. I don't know. But what I like to use it for is I slide my yarn through it and it kind of holds my yarn in place. So if you have a Spinolution, that's what I would do. If you don't have a Spinolution, I don't know, eyeball your wheel. I'm sure there's some sort of funny little hook or doodad or bob or something, but find somewhere to kind of hook your two-ply. And then when you start again, you'll just unhook it. And you might have to really, you know, it might be a little twisty over here. Just kind of hold it off to the side, slowly get your feet going, and then you'll be able to resume your normal rhythm.